What is justice? Justice is the ethical, philosophical idea that people are to be treated impartially, fairly, properly, and reasonably by the law and by arbitrators of the law. That laws are to ensure no harm befalls another, and that where harm is alleged, a remedial action is taken. Both the accuser and the accused receive a morally right consequence merited by their actions. That is how Cornell Law School defines justice. But what happens when the morally right consequence for one's actions gets completely erased? This brings us to the story of Mary Christine Huser. Occasionally, Eye on Justice receives a request from a viewer to feature a case that is close to their heart. But this case is different. It's not a cold case. The murder of Mary Christine Huser showcases the United States justice system, or better yet, its shortcomings. This is an example of how both a simple and yet sometimes complex rule of law established by our founding fathers can sometimes leave behind fractured lives as it assures protection of all persons. As we take you step by step through Huser's case, we'll clearly detail how a criminal can slip through a somewhat flawed system and escape a sound and just punishment. We'll begin with who Mary Christine Huser was and what happened to her on June 16th, 1987. Mary Christine, or Christy as she was lovingly referred to by her family, was a 19-year-old from Edgewood, Kentucky. She was athletic, loved dancing, and playing the piano. She had just finished her first year at Northern Kentucky University and had recently decided to switch from majoring in psychology to becoming an RN. She was to start nursing school in August. But just 2 months before she was to embark on a new career, her life would be tragically taken on the 16th of June. It was a warm summer's day. Christy left her parents' home at around 1 p.m. to take her boyfriend, Tim Milburn, to the Greater Cincinnati International Airport where he worked. She was last seen alive at 2 p.m. when she dropped him off. What happened in the last 60 minutes of Christy's life is unknown. Her mother claimed that Christy planned to return home without making any stops. At the time of her death, authorities gave conflicting reports concerning a motive. First reports stated that Christy was murdered in a drug-related incident. Detective Jerry Goins, an investigator in the case, said there was no evidence suggesting that Christy was involved in any drug activity. After an extensive search, Eye on Justice was not able to unearth any details leading up to the last moments of Christy's life. Here is what we do know. Authorities believe Christy was fatally shot in the chest at around 3 p.m. on the 16th of June. Her body was found in a wooded area behind Green Lawn Mobile Park on Rummel Road, near the intersection of US 25 and Mount Zion Road in Boone County at 11:45 p.m. According to Christy's mother, 17-year-old David Scott Cornwell called police and told them that he accidentally killed Christy, and then led them to where her body had been placed in the woods. Cornwell was the nephew of a friend of the Huser family, and not someone that they would have suspected of committing such a horrible crime. When authorities arrived at the scene, Cornwell had been drinking. Boone County Detective Major Don Stamper said Cornwell was arrested and charged with public intoxication pending further investigation of Christy's murder. Boone County Coroner Don Stith reported that Christy died from a single gunshot wound to the chest. There were no other marks on her body and no signs that she had been sexually assaulted. The weapon involved in the shooting was a .30-30 high-velocity rifle commonly used for hunting. Let's now take a moment to look at the weapon that killed Christy. The .30-30 is substantially more powerful than a handgun. The damage from this type of wound to a human would be horrific. There would be a tremendous amount of blood spatter and loss of tissue. Organs may undergo partial or complete disintegration. This is why one shot instantly killed Christy. As authorities turned up the heat on Cornwell and the possibility of life in prison or the death penalty loomed over the 17-year-old, he began to bargain for his life. Cornwell confessed that he had an accomplice. As part of a plea bargain, Cornwell would plead guilty to murdering Christy, and a reduced sentence would be recommended, eliminating the death penalty. In exchange, Cornwell would name 22-year-old William J. Coyle as his accomplice and testify that Coyle hid the weapon that killed Christy, along with her boyfriend's car that she had been driving that day. The Husers claim they were never notified about a plea agreement or any other matter. Their phone calls to the prosecutor's office went unanswered, and their only source of information came from articles in the local newspapers. Coyle of Florence, Kentucky, was arrested after leading authorities to the rifle he hid in DeVoe Park shortly after the shooting. Christy's boyfriend's car was found in front of Coyle's apartment at 6900 Oak Brook Drive. He was charged with complicity to murder and tampering with evidence. He was freed on a $20,000 bond and was later sentenced to 5 years in prison for his part in the crime. Cornwell was charged with complicity to commit murder, but his problems were just beginning, and the case against him would become complicated. Devastated over the loss of their daughter, the Husers would watch in disbelief as deals were made without regard to how they felt about the justice or lack thereof being doled out to the two people responsible for taking their daughter's life. George Huser simply stated, "I'm not pleased with the court system. My daughter is dead." The complications surrounding Cornwell began immediately. The teen had been in some trouble before Christy was killed. Just a year before, on July 24, 1986, Cornwell pleaded guilty to a felony in adult court in Arkansas. In Arkansas, a juvenile could be tried as an adult at the age of 16 years. The charge was burglary and theft of guns taken from his grandparents' home. Cornwell was placed on 5 years probation and ordered to pay $115 in restitution and $250 in court costs, of which he never paid. While the legal system in Kentucky decided how they would proceed with Cornwell, authorities sent him back to Arkansas, where he would be held for violating his parole. If Kentucky decided not to move ahead with trying Cornwell as an adult, he would have spent a year in a state home for juvenile offenders, which would have been a very small price to pay for taking Christy's life. To decide Cornwell's fate, a 12-hour closed hearing took place in which prosecutors and public defenders followed procedures outlined in Kentucky's juvenile code. In 1987, that code stated that a juvenile must have committed a felony in the previous year to be charged as an adult. Boone County Judge Robert Hall ruled that Cornwell would stand trial as an adult on the murder charge due to the theft committed in Arkansas. Although the Kentucky court was trying their best to impose a maximum sentence of 20 years against Cornwell, it would all come back to haunt them. But we'll get to that in a moment. While Cornwell was serving out his sentence, his public advocate was appealing the conviction. During Cornwell's incarceration, he would continue to display even more troubling actions. In one incident, Cornwell was placed in solitary for disciplinary reasons. But perhaps the most disturbing behavior came about when Cornwell tried to extort $100,000 from an Arkansas family of a missing child. Cornwell told authorities that he witnessed the murder of the 15-year-old missing girl, Tracy Basinger. He then changed his story, claiming that she had been sold into slavery in the Kentucky-Ohio area. Authorities thought it was all a ruse to try and get them to extradite him back to Arkansas so he could make a break and escape. Authorities never took Cornwell seriously, but Tracy's desperate father, Robert, did. Cornwell said he would take them to the girl for $100,000. Authorities explained to Basinger that Cornwell was the type who didn't have anything to lose. Lieutenant Lyle Scott of Mountain Home, Arkansas PD, said that he would get calls from Cornwell, who would tell operators to say that it was Tracy Basinger who was calling, all in his desperate attempt to spin his web of deceit. The Basinger girl was later found alive and well. When asked if she knew Cornwell, she said that she had never heard of him. In 1989, Cornwell won a new trial from the Kentucky Supreme Court. Cornwell's counsel argued that under Arkansas law, a guilty plea does not mean that Cornwell was adjudicated of a felony, as Kentucky Juvenile Code states. When Cornwell stole the guns from his grandparents, the judge agreed not to adjudge him guilty and suspended pronouncement of a sentence for 5 years on condition that Cornwell keep out of trouble for that time. So, Cornwell was never convicted, and therefore Kentucky's Juvenile Code concerning a prior felony that would enable them to charge Cornwell as an adult in Christy's murder could not be applied to this case. The Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that Cornwell should have been tried in juvenile court instead of circuit court. Therefore, Cornwell could no longer be punished for acts he committed before he turned 18. Judge Charlie Moore followed the mandate of the Kentucky Supreme Court and dismissed the murder charge against Cornwell. On January 22, 1990, David Scott Cornwell walked out of the Boone County Jail a free man, and his juvenile record was sealed. It was almost as if the murder of Mary Christine Huser never happened. Of course, her parents would disagree. Their firstborn child is gone, and so is the justice that their hearts ached for. Christy's mother said, "The house is very empty without her. She is always on my mind. The first thought in the morning and the last thought at night." On June 16, 1987, our world changed forever. Christy's story is one of heartbreak and frustration. Heartbreak for her family and friends that must cope with her loss every day without the closure of justice being served. Frustration because the system put in place to prevent murderers from walking free failed this victim in every conceivable way. Are you obsessed with true crime content? Subscribe now and join our growing community as we analyze and discuss the details of some truly baffling cold cases. Browse our growing library of cold case investigations and immerse yourself in the mysteries that keep us up at night. Subscribe and join the EOJ community today. All it takes is a click.